question was, in your journalism career of many years already, what was the most important or outstanding moment in your career up until now?
I think I would say the most memorable night of journalism for me was the night of the Rabin assassination, when Yitzhak Rabin was killed. I was at that rally, and so I attended the rally, and it was very moving. I went back to my home. I lived only a few blocks away from Rabin Square, and I was writing the story about the rally, what Rabin said, how everyone was reacting, and then all of a sudden got the news that he had been attacked and shot, and I rushed back to the square and I covered it, and I covered the aftermath, and I spoke with everybody. It seemed really just surreal and out of time. I ran back home and wrote my story about what had happened then, and then finally, after I finished writing, I kind of went back to the square just to sort of process and understand what had happened, and there were all of the. It was quite clear then that he was gone, that he was dead, and there were all the young people with the candles, and it was a very sort of intense night, intense moment. So I would say up to this point that was probably the most.
And for Americans to understand it in the proper context, if you were old enough in America to remember when Kennedy was assassinated, you would remember exactly where you were. You remember the weather. You remember so much about that moment. It's one of those moments that you'll never forget. But how do you compare that with what is happening right now, with what's happening today?
Well, that was a shocking, immediate moment, a shocking, immediate experience. There was fallout, there was an aftermath, but it was, a single event. And I think that this whole process of, week after week, the protests, the people on the streets, the extended battle is, I guess it feels like more of a transformation of a societal movement, rather than sort of one news event happening. So it feels more, I guess, ongoing and something that you have to keep paying attention to and keeps evolving and changing, rather than this big boom and then what happens in the aftermath of it. It's constantly evolving, and you just don't know in which direction it's heading.
And if you could capsulize where we are right now, what is the state in Israel for people who aren't here? How would you give them a feeling, a taste of what's really going on, other than the videos we just saw?
Well, I think, as in every society, when something's going on, I think that, some people feel the crisis. Some people choose to live in their own little day-to-day bubbles and don't feel it so much, but it seems to be really penetrating almost every aspect of society. I mean, it's just people are building this now into their weekly routines. People are joking, what do you do on a Saturday night? Dinner and a protest. That it's just become, the resistance or to it.
The social side of protesting.
Right, exactly. Part of people's everyday lives, that even my friends in the Trump era. I mean, I think, for people, at least in the United States, it's a little bit comparable to 2017 when Trump got in and he started bombarding everyone, with the Muslim ban, and he really seemed to be in a process of trying to transform the way the government worked, and everyone was standing up to it, and it felt like a fire hose of events that every time you would try to react and respond to one outrage, you would have another outrage thrown at you. So it was very difficult for journalists, in the news cycle, because you wanted to seriously follow up on what was happening, and while you were doing that, something else happened to distract you from it. But it's more serious than what happened in the Trump era, because in America, the balance of powers, the separation of powers, is such that you can't just wave a magic wand and say, I'm going to change the Constitution. You have to have votes in all of the states. It's a very
checks and balances.
Yeah, there is a path in the U.S. to changing the Constitution, but it's a much more complicated and difficult path that requires so much more buy-in from so many more parts of the population. And the way that the Israeli system is structured is it gives someone compared it to the Supreme Court is like it's like a missile launcher that's placed on a pile of sand. and that it's got
You-
so much power right now, but the basis on which it's standing can, pretty much be wiped away, and that's
You
what the
used an
government
interesting term there that not all Israelis are familiar with. Constitution.
Yeah,
We don't have that, which is
many
mainly.
Israelis are aware of the fact that they lack one, and that we have this, compilation of basic laws inside of it. But the Supreme Court is so powerful, but the pillars on which it stands are so weak, and its weakness is showing right now, because what this government is doing is very quickly, easily, and efficiently, if they have their way, if the current protest movement doesn't stand in their way, can completely eliminate the power that the Supreme Court has.
Great. And tell me something. So how do you see this playing out?
Well, right now everyone's, they're beginning to finally talk about a compromise. I think that, Benjamin Netanyahu is a very sophisticated political player, I think, and knows a lot about sort of like pushing things as far as he can possibly do and then pulling back when he needs to. I think he's very unhappy with the way Yariv Levin has, sold this to the people, and the amount. I don't think Netanyahu anticipated the amount of pushback. I think he's very unhappy with the current situation, but I think he's also in a trap. I think that Netanyahu's coalition partners are laying down the law and saying this has got to go through the way. I mean, he has power over Yariv Levin. If it was just Bibi versus the Likud member who's spearheading the effort, Yariv Levin, there could easily be a compromise, I think, worked out and a negotiation process. But the other partner in the judicial reforms is Simcha Altman of the Otzma Yehudit party. And it's that extreme party and the ultra-Orthodox parties who have been waiting for this moment, literally for decades, to try to take away the power of the Supreme Court so that they can do things like institutionalize their exemptions from the army. The Otzma Yehudit party and the ultra-Orthodox parties know that they're not going to get this moment back. So they are using the pressure that they have on Netanyahu, which is considerable. They can basically topple his government if they so choose. So I think we're in a situation where Netanyahu would like to negotiate and would like to compromise. Yariv Levin wouldn't necessarily like to negotiate and compromise, but he's in the Likud party, so he's subject to Bibi. And I think that the partners, the ultra-Orthodox and the Otzma Yehudit, are saying, like, no way, no compromise. Let's shove this thing through. And so, like, those are sort of the three components of the struggle that we're seeing. There's the protest movement against it. There's Netanyahu / Levin, who has to do what Netanyahu says. And there's the extreme coalition partners who want no compromise and no negotiation. So I think it's going to be an interplay of these dynamics. I think the more that Netanyahu sees that this is going to cause real economic damage to the country, and he's going to be blamed for it, is, I think, making him very, very, very nervous. But ultimately, I have to say, at the end of the day, why is Netanyahu in this position? Because he wants to save his own skin in his own trial. He doesn't want to go to jail. And so ultimately, as much
That
as
seems to be the title of this whole thing.
Right. I always say that Netanyahu puts the I in ideology, right? It's all about so unfortunately, I think that, no matter how dire things start to look in terms of our economy, security, society, democracy, etc., I still think that Netanyahu will, as usual, prioritize himself first. And if it looks like there's no way he can, there's no other path for him to save himself other than really damaging Israeli democracy, that's what he's going to do.
We might ask you to be a prophet for a moment before we finish.
We always say that journalists, we can report on things that have happened, but we can't report on things that haven't happened yet. So
now's your chance. Here's your chance. We're going to ask you, where do you see Israel in April after the legislative blitz? How do you see where we're going to be, what the country might look like?
Well, you're assuming there will be a legislative blitz, so there is a chance that that they could put the brakes on it. Listen, I mean, sadly, we haven't seen Hungary or Poland like collapse and fall apart, right? Even though they become less democratic. So, I think the Israeli people will, maybe become a little bit like the frog in the boiling water, in terms of, being outraged by this thing. But if it passed and if it becomes reality and if it becomes something that they have to cope with, the battle will just be taken to a different front. It'll be a question of what laws will the Knesset try to strike down? What decisions will the Supreme Court? It'll I think it'll be transformed from fighting this one big battle to not change the system. If the system gets changed, then it's going to become an issue to issue, battle by battle map. And hopefully people will have the energy to stay engaged in it, even if they feel like, quote unquote, they've lost. But unfortunately, this government really seems to be holding through it all. I wish I could say, oh yeah, it'll all make the government collapse and we'll have a new election. That's definitely not going to happen. I don't see any signs of that occurring.
Can we be optimistic? Sorry, no, that's just my.
Yeah.
Before we let you go,
if this government collapses, it'll collapse from the right. It'll be because Bibi wasn't right wing enough.
It will implode.
If he decides to cave on the reforms, and his partners get mad enough at him, that they'll withdraw. But I honestly don't see either Otzma Yehudit or the ultra-Orthodox parties, no matter how angry they get at Bibi, I don't see them giving up their power quite so fast, right?
So to thank you for having been so generous as to join us and to suffer through our technical glitches. And this is not a professional podcast, but we're getting there. What would you like to say to the people watching, the people in the United States or around the world who are outside of Israel? What would you ask of them or offer them?
I mean, as much as they can, if they can.
Oh.
As much as they can.
Sorry.
I think I've said it before that I see this great sort of connection that happens on the other side of the political map. The Orthodox, religious, right, pro-settlement movements in abroad and in Israel seem very bonded and on the same page all the time. And I often see on the side of the map from where I sit at Haaretz, the secular Israeli progressive world and the, I won't say secular, because very identified, the progressive Jews in the United States who care about Israel and care about the issues. I don't see that kind of connection between them. And I think that the glue is, podcasts like yours, obviously, but the two that I participate in, I host the Haaretz Weekly podcast, and I'm on the Promise podcast, and I write for the Haaretz English language website, and we're constantly trying to increase the communication and the connection between the people who hold liberal and progressive values in the U.S. and in Israel. And unfortunately, traditionally, there's been, I think just this huge divide, this huge gap, huge mentality, whatever, language issues, and everyone is very focused right now on their own arena. Saving democracy in the United States and saving democracy in Israel. And I think the more connection and understanding and communication that can be built, probably the better the both sides have. If you're a Jew or care about Israel and America, it's just so easy, I think, to opt out, to say, like, this is too much. I've had it. I'm done. So the more I see people still caring and engaged, kind of the more encouraging it is.
Allison Sommer, thank you very, very much. We greatly appreciate it, and your words are very
poignant
opening. We're a lot of people. In Israel, we think that people know what's going on. You've just informed them of a lot of stuff that they didn't even think about, probably. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.